live for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, welcome back to Worldhoppers, the collaborative YouTube channel where all the AdSense revenue goes to charity, as well as the revenue from merch that Leslie is repping. All the revenue from that also goes to charity. So, without further ado, we today will be discussing one of my personal favorite authors, Joe Abercrombie, Lord Grimdark, as he is known amongst his peasants. So everybody here has at least read the First Law trilogy. And I thought it might be fun to start with kind of why and when you picked him up and why you picked him up. That is to say, like, if it was like a bunch of hype or someone specifically told you, or like, what were you going into it expecting? Why were you picking it up?
I'll start.
Yeah.
So I won a giveaway for the trilogy. And I started that this year, and I've been reading one of his books, making my way through all of them ever since. I mean, I was in love on the first page of The Blade itself. When Logan, literally the first word out of his mouth was shit. And I was like, it was just the way that it was written and his situation, it just resonated, connected. I was just totally smitten with the series. And I think that was also my first grimdark novel. And I was like, grimdark, it doesn't sound like it would be something that I would be laughing at constantly. So I was like, I'm not normal because I'm just constantly chuckling at these characters and the situations that they're in. So I'm like, so I'm strange. So that's how I ended up. But I entered the giveaway because I had heard a lot about Joe Abercrombie and the First Law world. So when I saw that giveaway, I entered immediately and was so excited when I won. So,
How about you, Jimmy?
Well, I kind of got back into fantasy with the Song of Ice and Fire, like a lot of people have. And whenever you go onto the numerous amounts of duplicate posts on r/fantasy on Reddit, and you say, I need series that are just like a Song of Ice and Fire. Everyone, it's First Law and a lot of Wheel of Time. People try to tell you to also do Stormlight, all kinds of stuff, right? Out of everything that I've read about, I thought First Law sounded the most interesting. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to get into fantasy. And I did read other things before that. But I was getting burnt out on the Wheel of Time at the time. I think I just finished book 4. And I was like, pretty sure First Law is going to be a hit. Like, it just sounds like it's everyone's like, oh, it's so nihilistic. I'm like, I'm a nihilist. This is perfect. So I was burnt out. I was in a slump, and I said, I got to get out. And I looked to Big Daddy Joe Anaconda, and he pulled me up by my bootstraps and said, here's Logan in a pot. And I just gut busting. I agree, Leslie. It is so funny and so good. And pretty much immediately, like a lot of people I see say, oh, the Blade itself doesn't have a plot. I didn't enjoy it. Does it get better?
So
it never went through my mind. I
didn't care.
Invested. Yeah, I didn't care. Logan could just tie his shoes and I'd be interested into whatever he's doing.
No, Glotka, or I can't say his name real well. G-Man is what I call him in my videos. I could just read 20 chapters of him and talking about stairs.
Yeah, I mean, stairs.
It's lucky because he does talk about stairs quite a bit.
Well, I felt that.
There's so many times though, like where I don't know. I identified with that in like the stairs, right? It's like a simple thing, but there are tasks that I do on a weekly basis, like taking out the trash, that I'm immediately thinking that it is my arch nemesis. I may not get out of bed today. I may fake sick. So maybe I can convince my wife to do it. Like that like these are things that go through my head on a daily basis. So I identify with the psychopaths that Joe Abercrombie has painted on the page. And that is how I found it. Just looking for stuff other than a Song of Ice and Fire that was kind of like it. Turns out I don't actually think it's a ton like a Song of Ice and Fire, but I think
I don't either.
And that's a good thing because I think Joe Abercrombie has a very distinct and well-realized world with a cast of characters that are near and dear to my heart that I quote more than any other series. And that is how I've arrived at Joe Abercrombie's First Law and how I have stayed.
How about you, Hillary?
Yeah, I kind of similarly decided to try Abercrombie because of Reddit, r/fantasy. I never wanted to read grimdark. I am very self-aware that that is just not really my thing, and I'm okay with that. Unlike Jimmy, I am an optimist and don't necessarily see the world that way. But people just like would not stop talking about Abercrombie on our fantasy. And then when I started a booktube, I kind of felt like, well, if I'm going to be a booktuber, I need to at least like see what this is about and talk about it. And so the ironic thing for me is I actually went into the First Law trilogy expecting to dislike it, which I try not to do. But I went in being like, this won't be for me. I'm going to dislike it. And so I feel like it's even more impressive for me that it like turned my opinion around so drastically. Like I finished The Blade itself and I was like, what did I just read? Like I kind of liked that. Like that wasn't what I thought this was going to be. And I think what made me fall in love with him was in Before They Are Hanged. I don't remember what chapter it was. It was early on. And I read the first sentence of the chapter and I immediately knew it was somebody we hadn't heard a perspective from before. Mm-hmm. And it was this realization that like he can write a character voice so accurately that from one sentence, I immediately know that I have not heard this character's voice before. And like, that is such a rare thing that I've never read before. And like, that's, I think what gets me to stay is just, I love hearing his character voice.
I never get tired of it. I
Never
get tired. I actually, when I finished The Dark Tower, I was so depressed, so sad. I was in such a book hangover that the heroes was the only thing to snap me out of it. It just felt so familiar with just, even though they were different characters than the First Law trilogy, it just felt like coming home. And I just found, I mean, I've smiled when I read it. And now I will go and watch your video, Hillary. I was so scared that you weren't going to like it. And I love your channel so much. And I was like, she's going to trash the series. I can't watch her do it.
I'm going to have to unsub. Like, it's a big deal.
It's like a joke on my channel now because I mention it all the time. People are like, man, First Law is living rent free in your mind. I'm like, it really is, like constantly. And like, especially because I've been reading a bunch of grimdark because I just read all the SPFBO winners. And it has put in my mind even more that like I am not a grimdark person, but I am an Abercrombie fan because he is one of the only people I feel like, well, no, I shouldn't say that. I haven't read that much, but of all of the grimdark I've read, he is so funny in just such an honest way. It is not, he doesn't try to be funny in like, how gross can I be? How, grimy. It's just like, he's actually just funny. Like he just says such true human nature stuff that is just funny.
It's just very authentic.
It just feels real. It's just them living their lives and we're just getting to see it play out. And it's things you're chuckling at that, you know, something they do, it's funny. And you're like, well, I would react with the same anger if I did that thing. And oh man,
it doesn't have to be the exact situation. Like Glockta is such a good example. I love the scenes where like he's saying one thing and then his internal monologue is like just crapping on the person. Like we've all been there.
Me at work
we've
every
all
day.
been at work. Being like, yes, sir. And you're like, this person's an idiot. Like we've all been there.
Yeah. I realize I have neglected my moderator duties because I think that this is your Jimmy's and Hillary's first time on Worldhoppers, and I didn't have you introduce yourselves. So now that we're halfway through, if you would like to introduce yourselves.
Whoops.
Go ahead,
After
Hillary.
you, Jimmy. Oh, okay. I'll just take it this time. I'm Hillary. I run over the channel Bookborn, and I talk all things adult fantasy like everybody else here.
Very similar to Hillary. I'm Jimmy Nuts. Yeah, ditto. But my name is Jimmy Nuts, and I am over at the Fantasy Network, where I talk mostly fantasy, some sci-fi, and some Stephen King. Among my favorite series are A Song of Ice and Fire and Realm of the Elderlings. And that's what I do.
And you do it very well, both
back to your regularly scheduled adoration of Abercrombie. For me, actually, I have the bumpiest start with Abercrombie, even though I'm like, I don't want to say I'm the biggest fan here, but I think I'm the biggest fan here. But like, I read The Blade itself a long, long time ago for the first time, and I didn't know that it was grimdark. I didn't know that grimdark existed as a genre. I just thought it was a fantasy book because it was, I think, recommended to me by the Amazon algorithm that's like, oh, you buy other fantasy books, how about this one? It had good reviews. I didn't read the reviews, just like star rating. And the cover was like that, still back when they were publishing the parchmenty looking one. So like you can't tell anything from that cover. It's just like, this is gonna be old timey vibes because this looks like parchment. So I read it and I was like, I can't say that that was a bad book, but why would anyone want to read this? I don't understand. But I had mainly been reading like very kind of optimistic, heroic, happy hero's quest type fantasy. And I
That
didn't
surprises
know...
me about you, because when I've met you, that's not the vibe.
Yeah, well, so that was a long time ago. And so then thereafter, my tastes changed and I started reading grayer and grayer things, darker and darker things, stabbier things. And then I kept seeing over and over people say that, well, the best in the biz is Joe Abercrombie. And I was like, I remember reading that and I remember not loving it, but everyone says that's the best. I'm like, it's been a long time. I don't remember it being bad, but like, I don't know. And then what convinced me to give another go is Golan's had those anniversary editions in the gray and silver. And my favorite one was the blade itself. And I was like, but I remember not loving that. My friend was like, don't buy a book that you remember not loving. And I was like, but it's so pretty. I was like, okay, I'll reread it. And if I still hate it, then I won't buy it. And then here we are. And I just finished my third read of A Little Hatred last night.
Wow.
You know what's funny? Now that you're mentioning that, I forgot. I actually read Half a King by Joe Abercrombie like 7 years ago. So I guess technically that was my first introduction, but I did not like Half a King.
Yeah, I didn't like that either. And I read that.
But then people
more
told
recently.
me for first law, they're like, that was, don't judge Abercrombie off of Half a King. Yeah.
I wonder if it, the first time you read it, Leanna, if you didn't like it because of the other ones you were reading, the heroic ones, because to me, the blade itself, it felt like Abercrombie was making fun of all of those fantasy tropes that are just, we all know and love. And I'm like, I see you poking me about stuff I love and what you're doing with it. But I had to respect it because I was also just giggling and having a really fun time seeing what he was doing with it. Even though, and before they were hanged, he really frustrated me with what he did. But then again, I was like, oh, this is just so well done.
I was such a different person, such a different reader that when I picked it up the second time, I wasn't very far into it before I was like, this is totally my jam.
That's funny.
I think I grew into the cynic that I am today and came home to Abercrombie. So Leslie, you've definitely read through the heroes. Have you read further than that?
I am halfway through the heroes right now and loving it. Absolutely.
You've read them all, Jimmy?
Yeah. Yep.
And Hillary, you've read the original trilogy and Best Served Cold.
And Best Served Cold. Yeah, I'm the lowest here, but I'm going to read Heroes soon. I'm nervous for Heroes, but we're going to forge ahead.
I like it better than Best Served Cold. In fact, I'll rank it second overall. I like the blade itself. Usually the first book in the series is always going to be my first because it's my first love when I first fell in love with the story, the characters of the world. And the Heroes is number 2. Just, ugh.
Okay, well, I'm gonna do it. I
can't wait for you
I don't
to
like
read it.
battle scenes, and the Heroes is just a long
I was
battle.
gonna say for a book that's about a 3-day battle, there's surprisingly not that much battle scene.
Yeah, if any, you got to be realistic about these things, Hillary. I mean, a lot of war is standing around and waiting.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I mean.
That's
the book
what
is
we
kind of
get.
about how battle is not actually a lot of battle. There's a lot of other stuff going on.
Yeah,
War
I'm
is
excited.
boring.
Well, that's interesting, though. You said the blade itself is your favorite of the original trilogy. What's everyone's favorite of the original trilogy? Because for me, it's Last Argument of Kings. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
The first time I read through all 3, The Last Argument of Kings was my favorite just because of how many revelations and how much it sort of comes together. And it's all these moments of like, oh, this actually meant something and this actually makes sense. And oh my God, I didn't know. And oh my God, I didn't realize you were doing all of these things. So I was so much like mind-blowing moments. That was originally my favorite. But having reread it, the one that upon reread that I like better and better every time I read it is Before They Are Hanged, where like Last Argument of Kings, like it doesn't shock me anymore because I know these revelations are coming. So I'm no longer impressed by being wowed. I'm like, well, I know those revelations are coming. So I enjoy Before They Are Hanged, the journey of it, so much more every time.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I at first didn't love Before They Are Hanged compared to The Blade itself. But then after I finished after I finished Last Argument of Kings, all of a sudden I started appreciating Before They Are Hanged so much more. Like the further I get from the book, the more I like it. It's like a really weird thing that he does with that middle installment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I kind of like Before They Are Hanged and Last Argument of Kings equally. And the thing that really gets me about Before They Are Hanged is I love the subversion of the Fellowship. Like the grand journey, and it's like nah, and then and the best part is that he didn't make us travel all the way back. We were back.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, this is excellent. Everyone's worse from this trip. It was not about the friends we made along the way. It was just everything. I was just like, I like this.
Although
I like it
friend
too.
Brian would say it is about the friends you make along the way. # Bro Kings forever. Logan and Giselle.
Listen,
Well, and
Go ahead.
oh, I feel bad. I was gonna say, and you hit on something really good that Abercrombie does do, and I noticed he never repeats a scene. It's something I appreciate greatly. You never see the same thing from a different person's perspective. He keeps the story going.
Yeah, he is, especially with the new trilogy, has achieved a form of tightness among a book that very few will ever see and still write at the level that he is at.
The Trouble with Peace has no business being that good.
It's so good.
It's ridiculous.
It's so good.
I still have another book after the one I'm on before I get to it. Y'all stop.
His new books, books 1 and 2 of Age Madness, are without a doubt, in my mind,
I thought A Little Hatred was unbeatable, and then he throws The Trouble with Peace out. And I'm like, how is it better than the best thing I've ever read?
The Trouble with Peace is interesting because as a second installment, I think he actually wrapped up a lot of stuff really well in Trouble with Peace. I mean, obviously there's still stuff to be told and to figure out. However, I really wonder where book 3 will go. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen like that, and that to me is like one of my favorite things that series can do.
I have to say, like, so last night, actually all of yesterday I read A Little Hatred like all in one day, but it was my third time through, but it was my first time reading it since having read The Trouble with Peace. And it was really interesting. Like, obviously, with no spoilers, I'm not going to say anything. But just like, again, like, there's things that you learn in The Trouble with Peace that now this is my first time recontextualizing A Little Hatred with that new information. And it made like so many little moments me go, oh, actually, it's very interesting that character said that now, knowing what I know comes later. So the rereadability of these books in general is just, they get better every time I read them.
Yeah. And this is why, like, there are so few booktubers that reread books. So I'm loving hearing all of you guys talking about reading them multiple times because I am a huge rereader. Sometimes I will reread the book while I go back and start over if I feel like I missed something. But I think these I'm already looking forward to rereading the series because once I've completed it, I love to go back to the beginning and see what I missed and see all of those connections and all of the signs if there were there. I absolutely love that, and I agree. Huge rereadability for this series, for this author.
Also, not just because of like revelations and like, you know, things like that, but also just because his character work is so strong. There's so many characters that like you see in different like stages of life and different positions, and then like to go back and kind of remind yourself where you first saw them and what they were like. Shivers, which we've all now seen.
I was thinking in my mind,
go back,
he's
and when
my
you first
favorite.
meet Shivers, he's just this like kid that you're like, I thought Rattleneck's son was dead. No, that's his other son. Like this like little punk kid.
My favorite. Absolute favorite.
There's a very
Shivers is the most devastating character that I've read so far. I feel like I know that we have a lot of devastating characters, but none quite hit me as hard as Shivers.
He's my second favorite after Glocta, for sure.
Yeah.
Not favorite, just most sad, pathetic.
Aw.
Sad.
Poor Shivers.
Shivy.
Poor
Oh
Shiver.
man, he is just has the best arc. Oh,
Yeah, you can make a strong argument that Shivers is the best overall arc in the first. You could argue he's the main character in some ways. I mean, kind of hard to say that with the first trilogy, right? Because he's not as high.
But yeah, across the first law books, he's got one of the best character arcs in literature.
Yeah, I really, really enjoy him. One of the things we're talking about rereadability. Now, I'm planning in 2022, hopefully at the end of 2022, to be doing a reread of the entire First Law universe, because I miss it already. It's not even over, but
I'll probably be starting another reread.
your
by
eighth
then.
reread.
And I'm over here going, I need to remember this for future planning.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm so excited to do this is because one thing that Abercrombie set out to do, and he's done it quite well, is the fact that he never wanted to have a sandbox medieval fantasy world. He wanted to have the world evolve along with his characters as generations pass. And Abercrombie has silently built one of the best worlds, in my opinion, in fantasy. The world building I would not say is, as on a Cosmere type level, but it doesn't need
it's also
to be.
very low magic, so it's unfair to compare those.
Exactly. I think there's a lot to offer here. I think that he is providing a unique package with the fact that we're going into like an industrial revolution with the new trilogy, and we see we see that transition through the standalones, and it's why the standalones are so pivotal in the experience.
Skip any First Law books.
You can't. It's not allowed. And that's one of the things I'm actually most excited to reread about. Is just like looking at the setting and seeing like, oh, this was maybe hinted at a little bit sooner. And then it also just feels like you're in a time machine. It's cool.
Yeah, I am. It's something I came to appreciate. Like, I wouldn't consider this a spoiler, but the poisoner, whose name I can never remember. Thank you. I always know it starts with an M, but that guy, Morvier, he doesn't believe that magic exists in Best Served Cold. And I love that detail. Like, it was just like, no, but it does. Like, as a reader, like, but it does.
And Shivers is already the like thuggish, like uncouth Northman, and he's the one to be like, no, I've seen it. It's like, okay, peasants, little like
like,
dummy from the north. Yo, sure, you've seen some magic.
There's such a realness to the way that Abercrombie writes that. I know that trope has been used a lot in fantasy. Like, I have seen it, but never to that effect, where it really does feel like reading someone on the internet, saying that something doesn't exist. Like, it gives you that intense energy that you deal with. Like, and I don't know how he does that, but I think it's done the best of what I've read in his books of that. Like, there are people who don't even know magic exists because magic is leaving this world and they've never witnessed it. So why would they believe it?
Yeah.
I can't think of Morvier without thinking of the rope that breaks and he swings through.
There's so many moments, I think, that like when we talked about the comedy in these books, a lot of the comedy just comes from the sheer realness of the moment, where it's just something where you're like, something goes wrong in like, it's not epic and it's not convenient and it's not like a banana peel, that's so funny. It's like, it's just one of those like really realistic things where you're like, it's like stubbing your toe while you're trying to carry a heavy box, and then you drop it and you're like, and like there's just like situations like that where like all throughout the books, all these situations these characters are in, something happens and like you can, even though you've never held a sword and fought in an army and dealt with, the first of the Magi, there's still like, there's this realness to it where you're like, I feel like I've felt this and I feel like I get this. I know what you're talking about. This feels true.
Is it Dogman who always needs to pee before they fight?
Yep.
Yeah, I
get it.
I know it. I laugh every time. Like, I know it's not me, but it's just like, yep, of course, every time.
Every time.
Well, but in addition to making me laugh, he finally jerked some tears out of me with Best Served Cold. And then he made me mad. But who I cried. Well, no, I'm mad because I cried because I shouldn't have, and I was crying over Casca.
Yeah.
I love Casca. I still call him
too.
Jack Sparrow of the First Law.
It's pretty
That
accurate.
is appropriate, yeah.
And that, I think Casca is actually, when I think about the First Law quotes, other than the realistic and, like the go-to Logan Nine Fingers quotes, like I think of the longer, like more idiomatic type sounding quotes, it's usually Casca, like who I'm quoting whenever I quote First Law. He's got some of the best lines.
Yeah, he's a monologuer for sure, right? Like,
but he also has some great just like quips that are like really succinctly in a nutshell. Just I forget, he has some line about like heads on spikes never going out of fashion.
I remember that part.
I there's an elephant in the room, and I'm just going to address it. Let's talk about the best sex scene writer in all fantasy.
Oh my gosh. I
So
want
good, honestly.
I want the outtakes of when Stephen Pacey was recording those scenes for the audiobooks.
I
I
want them
need
adapted on
those.
At the
screen.
end of the Sharp Ends audiobook, there's an interview with Stephen Pacey and Joe Abercrombie. And like they're kind of talking about, so what was it like kind of, reading this out loud? And Joe, what was it like hearing this out loud? And like, well, there's obviously like the scenes that are like
Right.
kind of awkward. But Stephen Pacey was saying how like he just, sort of got into it, and that like honestly, like everyone else in the room was probably more uncomfortable, like the director
Yeah.
and the sound guy or whatever, like having to stand there and listen to him like with the mic just by himself in the sound booth making all the like grunting noises.
Well, I imagine it worked well because they were they were very awkward between the characters. So I'm sure for Stephen Pacey feeling awkward doing it, it just worked. It was just
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
they
I'm
also
someone who
really-
I never think a sex scene improves a book. I will say,
No.
though, they're so funny.
I think they're as grimdarkly realistic as
So
everything else is.
like,
Phenomenal.
it's I appreciate something I talked about was like so much grimdark likes to use sex as a weapon to try to
Mhm.
make things so grim, and it usually involves like violence against women. And so the fact that he never uses that stuff, like these scenes are awkward. They are as awkward for the men as the women in these scenes. Like I appreciate so much how much restraint Abercrombie has in like he never uses it as a weapon. Instead, it's always hilarious. It's always just like so funny.
Yeah, Abercrombie kind of he kind of broke the idea of grimdark to me a little bit, like where I was like, what is grimdark at this point, right? Like I for instance, I just read all 16 books of Realm of the Elderlings. I find that to be way more grim.
Oh,
I think like
those
I
will
honestly like
destroy
the thing
you.
about Hobbes books that would make me not call them grimdark is that predominantly the POVs themselves are less cynical. Like the eyes through which you view the story tend to be a more hopeful character.
Yeah, and there is hope. You're absolutely correct.
So you're not seeing it through the eyes of a Galacta. You're seeing like the events that are similar to First Law, but through the eyes of like the young Call Shivers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. And also there is a tone, this isn't a Realm of the Elderling stream, but there is a sense of hope when you finish those 16 books, in my opinion. But I could say the same thing for First Law in a lot of ways. And I think I'm going to go on a monologue here. Okay, so I think that nihilism gets a bad rap from a lot of people because when people hear nihilism,
Spoken like a nihilist.
well, actually, but I do think people hear nihilistic, like they say, and Hillary, like you're saying, you're an optimist. Like you don't see that grim side of humanity. Like you believe, in the future, yada yada yada. And I think that's awesome. And the fact that you can enjoy these books, I mean, I think that spells out that I don't know. I just feel like a lot of people use the nihilistic themes as a negative. Of why, I won't read this. Whenever nihilism is heavily misunderstood at a lot of times between active and passive nihilism. And I think that Joe Abercrombie actually promotes active nihilism in his books, which is to essentially say that if there is no specific meaning to life, then you're not bound to it and that you can explore other things. And now he kind of plays that a little bit because sometimes people arrive back to where they were, right? I think the circular nature is kind of an interesting decision on his side, which I happen to really enjoy. But I don't think that ties into what he is saying.
But that's what people really do. That's so realistic. So that's reality
I
for
actually
a lot
think
of people.
that's the most depressing thing about the books for me, actually. It's not like the anti-hero nature. It's that try as these characters might, they always end up where they started or worse off. I actually just made a video about that, about how like you see it. It's the anti-hero journey. Instead of them ascending, they're just like, as hard as they try, they descend.
Well, I mean, there's a line in Red Country that I think is from Logan, where he says, the trouble with running away is wherever you go, there you are. That like you can never escape from yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think there are some arcs that span over multiple books that I could consider to be a bit of an ascension, but I can't say them for spoiler context.
And another thing that I love, this was the first book that I read that had the number of great characters or not good characters at all. They were bad people. And I loved them all. I absolutely... And it is because I believe the author just did an outstanding job writing his characters and developing them the way that he did. And
they're three-dimensional. They're not just like characters of evilness.
You're right. They literally come off the pages. And I just connected with them, each of them on some level. I understood where they were or where they were trying to go. The journey, the personal battles within themselves and the struggle. And it's like, like in the first law, Logan battling, wanting to be a good man. And it's just like, that's a battle that it's like an addiction. Every day it's a battle you get up and you fight. And oh my gosh. And so you're hoping for the best, but then you love it when they're the worst. So I mean, I was so conflicted. Yeah, I was so conflicted, but I did not mind.
Well, I think that's also on purpose, and I think Joe manipulates the reader very well with Logan specifically, because we are told about the Bloody Nine, but we don't really see the Bloody Nine at first,
until much
right?
later.
Yeah. So he's actually manipulating the reader to root, like you said, for the worst of him to come out, because we want to see the legend on page. So it kind of almost plays into our grayness as a reader in a way. And I also like that he boxes us into a corner a lot of times with moral dilemmas. Speaking like of West.
West. I was just going to say West.
So West is the only good guy. At one point you think this is the only good guy in the story, and then he disappoints you. And you're like...
I was so upset.
And then, I mean, I won't say what, but we all know what happens with West too, which we should not agree with, but really tough not to.
I'm like, I don't know that I condone this, but I don't not condone this.
I don't not condone it.
I think Abercrombie makes us I think that's where he's very successful.
Yeah. Well, but he teaches us a lesson about wanting to see the Bloody Nine in I think Last Argument of Kings. I didn't want to see him anymore after what he did.
I kind of
I'm
did,
like,
but
you can go somewhere.
Well, I do think, I mean, in addition to like us seeing it on page, it's still kind of like hard to know because you're still kind of in his head. And I think it's more when the other characters who they have now first seen the Bloody Nine and the way that they react to it, where they're like, they've been told about it, just like we've been told about it. And now they've finally seen it. They're like, I know I said I was cool with you and all, but like, you are scary.
That's actually what I think also separates Abercrombie from the other grimdark I've read and had problems with, is that he doesn't try to make you like his characters. I think sometimes, let me explain, like sometimes I've been reading grimdark and it's like the author, you can tell, gets nervous that they've made their character too bad. And so to compensate, they make everyone else in the world like love this character and fawn over them. And it's happened a lot in the grimdark I've read. And it frustrates me as a reader because it doesn't feel very natural. Whereas Abercrombie switches that and like you said, Leanna, like some of the people are saying like, hey, I'm not cool with you anymore, Logan. And it makes me as a reader be like, hey, no, he's misunderstood. Like you just don't understand him. Like somehow Abercrombie, by not pulling punches, by not pretending that his characters are misunderstood or good, makes us readers feel that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, he actually makes them likable.
With Glockta, he's never like, a torturer, but I wish I didn't have to do this and I have to do this and like, but it break. No, he doesn't mind. He doesn't care. And he's like, I'm a bad person. And he thinks to himself that he probably was a bad person before he was tortured and became a torturer. He hates Giselle mainly because Giselle reminds him of himself before he was tortured. Like there's so much like realness about Glockta's internal monologues where you're like, I have felt these kind of ways before, sir.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good old Giselle. Oh, I can't think about him without shaking my head. Bless his heart, as
ironically, on paper, he technically is the best of everybody.
I agree.
Technically. But reading from him made me the most furious. I hated him more than any other character.
Everybody hates him. Everybody. Like, I swear, anytime I see someone reading, I'm like, oh, how you enjoying? They're like, it's good. I hate Giselle. And I'm like, he's not. He's just dumb. He's just dumb.
Pretty dumb.
I would like to say it's because he is the kind of evil we have to deal the most with on a daily basis, which is why he is the most infuriating to read about.
But he is also, like, I think for that reason, one of the most satisfying to see grow, because out of all the characters, he's the one that actually in some way does change. Everyone else kind of ends the series the same person they started out. But Giselle does actually face adversity, and that, I mean, I just love the reactions from characters who like now see him post quest and are like, is that Giselle
Mhm.
acting kind of kingly and responsible and like,
Very regal.
who are you and what did we do? What did you do with Giselle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that whenever people say, "Oh, everyone," ends up at the back, back where they began, I always use Giselle. That's always my prime example.
Good point.
And I like Giselle
Well-
quite a bit. Well,
Sort of. He like I always say Luther because I say his first name wrong. Luther, he at the end is really depressing for him because he thinks he's in a better spot than he really is. Like, because we know things behind the scenes at the end of that trilogy
well, he's still
that
dumb.
is so depressing. And so, yeah, he's still dumb. That's my point. Like, he's still
dumb, but he,
making
like,
the same dumb
realized,
decisions.
It occurs to him to help a person out who's in need. It occurs to him that others might be suffering. Like, he's not as self-centered as he was. I mean, he still thinks to himself that, like, he deserves everything.
He's not winning Nobel
amazing,
Peace Prize
but-
anytime soon. But
No, but now he's a dummy with a crown.
yeah, he's a dummy with a crown. I like that.
But I mean, him and Logan, like, genuinely kind of have a little, like,
They
like
were
I said,
bros.
hashtag bro kings.
Yeah.
Oh man.
They were bros, sort of.
I mean, I just like that scene every time I read the books gets me when Logan is like, "Do you think I'm a good man or something?" And Giselle's like, "You're the best man that I know." And you're like,
Which again shows how naive.
They both are at that point.
and like that's exactly
Logan-
what Logan needed to hear. And you're like, of course Giselle would think that because like Logan like saved his bacon on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
Just not all of his teeth.
Yeah, poor guy.
No, but he could, he needed to lose a few to gain a heart.
He had
Yeah.
a hell of a smile though. It's a shame.
Well, so we haven't talked about Pharaoh or Artie, the female characters in the first.
I
Say
was
now,
literally
Artie
about
got
to
on
say.
my nerves. I love Pharaoh, but
I love
Artie.
Yeah, I liked Artie.
I like
I love
Artie.
Artie.
Leslie, why do you hate Artie so
Why
much?
do you
Tell
hate
me.
Artie? Yeah.
I need to know.
She just. I like where she ended up, but I didn't like. I guess because she was just always drunk and she was mean,
She was
and I did not like the personality of who she was to other people. I didn't like how she treated other people. I didn't like how she used people. But I think she ended up with exactly who she needed to end up with. Like I was rooting for them the whole time.
Me too. And I think for me, the reason I think I liked Artie so much is that this woman in a grim fantasy who uses sex to get ahead is so common and it is never done well. And I think Artie is done well because she is multidimensional, like all the characters. Like she uses, sex to get ahead, but it's very clearly her own motivations. She's a messy person, just like everyone else. And I just like that. I felt that it wasn't just that typical like vixen character who really doesn't have a lot of motivation. Like I felt like I understood.
She wasn't the whore with a heart of gold.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
wasn't the whore with a heart of gold. She didn't have a heart of gold. Like she was who she was.
No one
and
had a
it
heart
was-
of gold in First Law.
I didn't
No.
even really feel that she used sex to get ahead. I think she just wanted to have sex with who she wanted to have sex with. And so she did, and she didn't care. She went and did as she pleased.
But I felt like
But it
her
didn't fall into
relationship
that
with,
prostitute trope.
Yeah.
I don't know. I see it a lot where it's like, but she's in love with all the people. Like it just
Yeah.
didn't read that way. Like I loved her. I don't think it's well.
But I feel like because we actually don't get an Artie perspective, which like I kind of wish we had. But
Yeah.
regardless, even though we don't ever like see inside her
Yeah.
mind, I think that because we are in West's mind, and West feels very much like Leslie, where he's very frustrated with his sister, and he's very angry with her, and he's like, "Oh, I can't rely on you to ever like pull shit together."
Well,
and
I
it's
think
like,
he's more
and then, like, but the
angry at
conversations
himself.
that they have, or like when they have those moments of truth where Artie is like, "You know why I am the way I am, and do you know what my life has been like, and do you realize how you've put me in that position yourself, and you realize how
Yeah.
you are kind of the reason that I have been forced to be the way that I am." And West is like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Yeah,
he
it's
was
really
always
hard.
angry at her because of what he felt responsible for what happened to her. because he left her in that situation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and a lot of
so-
Abercrombie's characters are doing their best for where they are,
Yep.
and I think West is a very good example of that.
Mhm.
He's also
I love
West is
West.
like one of the. I mean, I guess like we said, he's maybe the goodest guy in the book, but he's also one of the only ones that's concerned with being the good guy and that being preoccupied with presenting himself that way. If that makes sense, like he's concerned about his reputation, and a lot of the others are not.
When he got his northern name, I love that so much.
Yeah,
I
that's a good
love
moment.
that. That was just a highlight of the series for me.
I think what you go,
No,
Jenny.
go ahead.
Okay, well, I feel bad. You always let me go. Just real quick, I was going to say, I think because a lot of people attach on to Wes as like the goodest guy very early on, I think seeing those conversations with Artie very put into perspective how somebody that can face very good to a lot of people does not face good to everybody. And I think that's a very real moment in that series about that situation.
Yeah, I think it speaks to no one's one thing. Very, very rare. And when I say very rare, I mean never. But beyond the first trilogy, I think that the sequel trilogy does a really great job of a couple things that we're talking about here. And one of it happens to be, I think that there is a character that is morally good in the new trilogy. I think there is a character in the new trilogy that is all good almost. At least from my perspective. I feel like I could say his name and it wouldn't matter, but I don't know if I should.
Well, don't say his name, because if it's somebody that we may think is dead because we haven't run across him again.
It's not that. It's a new
Can you
character.
tell me the gender of this person? Then I can try to guess who you could possibly think is all good.
Male, and he hates hangings.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess that's also the character that I identify the most with in all of the First Law.
Well, there you
So
go.
I guess
There
you
you
think
go,
I'm
Leanna,
morally
you're a
good.
good person.
I guess
But
to
I
not
don't
speak
think
in
that
total
character is
riddles
morally
here.
good.
To not speak in total riddles, there is a character that I think is good, and I think that it provides a different like perspective in the First Law universe, which Abercrombie sets out to do with a lot of different people.
Well, I mean,
in the
yeah,
new
a lot of
trilogy.
I was concerned when the new trilogy was announced that, like, I was like, of course I'm going to read this, but is there a story to come back to? Are we just, scraping the bottom of the barrel and having more First Law for the sake of having more First Law? And I'm so sorry for ever thinking that. Oh my goodness, it's so good. But that, not only is the world pushed into an industrial age, making everything kind of new, there's all the characters for the most part are kind of new types of character that we have. It's not just like, oh, same thing. We've got a torturer, we got a warrior, we got a privilege. I mean, they're kind of different people from different places with a new situation, a new perspective, a new type of person. The infinite variety of humanity that is on display in the First Law is unparalleled as usual.
Yeah, and the female characters are excellent, in my opinion.
I'm excited to hear that, because one thing of the first 4 books I read, everyone was like, "Oh, Best Served Cold is his like female book," but I actually didn't really feel like it was
Little
that.
Hatred is
A little
his female
hatred in
book.
the female book.
No,
Okay, because I was like,
would
it
agree.
doesn't. It didn't feel like that to me. I felt Shivers was much more of a character I was invested in,
Honestly,
and more really
in
from
the
his
heroes, I think
perspective.
there's some more representation of femaleness.
Yeah,
other than
yeah.
Best Served Cold.
I like the one I've met so far. She's wonderful.
Henry.
Yeah, I think.
But I think for I thought Pharaoh in First Law was fantastic.
Oh,
I mean,
I
she
love
was
all his female
amazing.
characters. I just don't think they get a lot of screen time, I guess is more what I'm saying. Like even Pharaoh as one of the main people felt at least that I don't know if that's true, it felt like she got less screen time.
Well, she's not even, I mean, kind of like when I was talking to my brother about this too, that at first, when you're introduced to Pharaoh's character, you're quite a ways into the Blade itself, and all of a sudden you get another new perspective, and you're like, who is this? And like she doesn't seem to be connected to anything else that's going on, and you're like, that's cool and all, but like, why am I reading about this? Like, what does this have to do with anything? And then finally you see how she's connected. But like she's definitely like thrown into the mix much later, and then because a lot of the perspectives are all in the same place, which usually you have like kind of one perspective to represent a place, so you can keep your eye on that. But we've got like several perspectives all clustered together. I don't know for a fact, because I haven't like calculated it, but I do feel like her eyes on that might be less than the others.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think A Little Hatred is his best book from a female character's perspective.
Well, Trouble
and
with Peace equally. I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
yeah, I
Little
guess
Hatred.
it starts.
Just his
That's
new
it.
trilogy.
His new trilogy in general, I think, just has fantastic.
What do I
female
got? I got
characters.
like 5 books to read before I get there.
Yeah, you're almost there.
Get to reading.
So, in my opinion, and maybe Leanna, you can yell at me if this is wrong. I feel like you could save Sharp Ends for after the new trilogy.
No.
Well,
I mean,
you've
well,
been
for
corrected.
one, there is stuff in it that like it's kind of good to know, and two, it's so short that like you may as well knock that out.
Oh yeah, it's tiny.
I'll do
I have it
I'll
ready
do it
to
in
go.
order.
I read it
I'll
before the
start after
trilogy.
this.
It was good.
Maybe I can catch up to you, and we can finish off Heroes together.
Hooray! I think it's a very fast read.
We are officially 4 weeks or 3 weeks exactly to the
From the
release
Wisdom of
date.
Crowds.
Yeah.
And then it's over.
3 weeks, and then it's a wrap. But he did say he would return to the First Law universe.
Yeah, but there's no like
Ooh.
date that I can be anticipating.
No,
and
there's
nothing
not.
to mark want to read and nothing to pre-order.
So, are you apprehensive of him going into a new role with a new story? Then,
I mean, apprehensive isn't the word. It's just that like I love First Law so much that like I can't be excited for something when I don't know what that thing is, if that makes sense. So like I have faith in him as an author, but I don't, it's going to be something different, something new, probably pretty good, but I don't know what is there to be excited about it yet.
yeah, I mean, you definitely have a good point there. I feel like Abercrombie has a style that I identify with, and as long as his writing doesn't change, which doesn't mean it needs to be, barbarian Northman sayings that I can quote with my friends or whatever. But if he were to keep his prose and his approach to writing, I think almost any world that he would write in would at least be okay for me.
Yeah, I mean, of course I'll read it. But I would be more excited if he announced another First Law trilogy. I'll be
For
real.
sure.
Problem though is you do have this like give and take of like not wanting an author to exhaust something to the point you start disliking it. Sometimes ending on a high note can
But
be
see, that was
better
my concern
overall.
with the Age of Madness trilogy. I was already worried that was happening, and since he proved me wrong once, well, now I will never think that again. I'll be like, just keep writing First Law. There is no bottom to this barrel. Just keep going.
Yeah, it's one of those things where sometimes like I think about First Law and I think about other series and whatnot. And I'm like, man, I wish it was a little bit more in a scope. Like I wish that there was maybe like different continents with different things at play. And then
I mean, it would be cool if he wrote a trilogy that was like in Gurgle.
I would love that.
Oh,
That would be awesome.
that would be amazing.
So if that was what his new project was like still First Law, but like over
Yeah.
here now, I'd be like, yes.
Yeah, I'd be all in for that. I feel like we haven't got enough from that area.
And it's always remained kind of, we've seen people from there. We've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, there's rumors of crazy things going on down there in Age of Madness. So
Well, I guess it kind of depends on where the Wisdom of Crowds ends. We'll see what the lay of the land is like in the entire
it's a good point.
circle of the world, as they say in First Law.
We haven't talked about Bayaz. We haven't talked about Gandalf.
Oh my
if he had
gosh.
taken the One Ring.
Are we
What
allowed to
doing?
talk about him? Is this a no spoiler live?
I mean, can I just say
We've talked
him-
about everybody a bit, so
him walking into the town and making sure he goes and gets the right clothes first is like the best.
oh my god,
thing
that's mean.
ever.
When
It's
they
literally
explain Logan as a method actor, and that's why he's acting completely bewildered.
so good.
But I tell you, I never once trusted Bayaz. Not from the moment I met him or when Logan met him. I never once trusted him. Something about him.
I was all in.
I was
Yeah.
all in. Me too, Jamie. I'm so glad you said that.
well, so
I was just
it was so
just-
on the nose that I was like, he's got to be
Yeah.
the good guy.
I never approach any First Law character as a good guy because no one is that simple. But I did just kind of generally think of him as, well, he clearly knows a lot about a lot. And so I don't necessarily know what his agenda is, but like he's probably a guy to listen to because he probably knows more than everybody else does. So like,
well. By
Yeah,
the
I thought he
time
was. I
met-
totally trusted him. I was like
Yeah.
all in. I didn't think it wasn't because I thought he was like good, like you said, Lena. I just thought like he generally wants probably what our characters want. He generally is trying to be helpful.
Progress.
the wizard.
Yeah, and even when the seeds were being planted, I was like, these people are just jealous. Like for a long time. It took a
Well,
long time.
by the time I met him, I had learned enough about Joe Abercrombie that I was like, okay, we have our wizard. No way is he going to be a good wizard. I'm like,
you were correct.
now, did I have any idea the extent of where that was going to go? Not even a little bit.
I honestly think that's one of my
Okay, I also
favorite
did
things
say
about
that,
First Law.
some of my favorite interactions are in Last Argument of Kings between Bayaz and Pharaoh, when both of them have had it with each other and
Mhm.
no longer any like nothing resembling patience. Like he is not even trying to put up with her and she is not even trying to put up with him. Like they're just the best.
She's never putting up with anybody, period. Like, just the way she would address
promised me
Giselle when she would
vengeance.
see him.
I promised you nothing.
just like calling them pinks. Why do you call us pink? Well, what color are you? Pink.
Pharaoh.
I started calling my husband. I'm like, whatever, you pink. And he's like, the heck does that mean?
Was it you and I, Lana? Were we just talking about pinks as an insult on our last live together?
Yeah, because I think we were talking about like made up swears and made up insults.
And how that one works so well as a made up
works
insult.
so
doesn't
well.
need explanation.
And I think partly we talked about that's because he doesn't try to explain it. And also because it would work, as Leslie was saying, like as a real insult. Like I could go call someone a pink right now and it sounds insulting.
Well, because they don't know what's going on. They're like, she knows what she means, but what does she mean? Like, is she being
It just
funny?
makes me think of one of you guys know Chuck Norris jokes?
Yeah.
Well, one of them was Chuck Norris invented every color in the color spectrum except pink. Tom Cruise invented pink.
Oh man,
Like, that's what I would think if somebody called me a pink in the real world.
Yeah, I think it's because what we talked about is that Joe Abercrombie he uses so many, real swears that we know to get his point across that when he uses fake ones, they just seem in character as well. It doesn't seem like he's trying to pull a punch or something.
Yeah, and also like word selection matters a lot, in my opinion, when it comes to swears. I have a big problem when swears don't feel pointed enough or have enough leverage behind them.
or if they're overused.
Oh, for
a well-timed curse word, it's perfection.
Yeah.
But when it's just like every 5 words, I'm like, I am distracted by it now.
Yeah, I would agree.
Or if they're outlandish made up ones, like when they're talking about back to the mud with you, I mean,
it's
exactly what actually happens, and it just works.
I think it just ties in with his character creation because how people talk are a reflection of who they are, and so he is able to make these insults sound natural, and I think that's also just like a skill thing.
And they're distinctive to the region that the people are from. So I just
like you definitely have a sense of the culture clash when like Northmen kind of now team up and meet up with the Union, and the way that they're not exactly jiving and the way they talk about each other and the way that they talk, like there's just such a distinct sense of otherness between them, and it's hilarious at times, but it's also, it feels very real again, like when in real life you see people from different walks of life or different countries or whatever it may be kind of clashing because they have different ways of going about things, different ways of talking, different ways of being, and they're both ridiculous to each other. It's not like one is like lesser and one is higher. Like they're both ridiculous to the other because they're different.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
he's perfect as a writer is what we're saying.
pretty much basically.
I think he
Do
knows
no
his
wrong.
strengths. I think he knows his strengths and he sticks to them. And whenever he takes a step outside of the box, it's usually pretty calculated. And it's also steps that I think all authors take as they evolve. And Joe just hasn't really missed, in my opinion. I know some of the standalones don't mesh with some people, but in the grand scheme of First Law as a 10-book series, I think it's been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, and even like because, Jimmy and Leanna were on my live about Best Served Cold. That wasn't necessarily my favorite, but I also wasn't bad. Like I didn't read it and think like this is a bad book. It was more just, not my favorite use of some of his things. But I think when you're a skilled writer, you cannot vibe with a book, but it doesn't make it like bad. Like I didn't
Whenever I
really,
review a first law book, I'm like, well, it's a first law book, so it's great. But so on the scale
Yeah.
of first law, grading on a
Right.
curve.
I think it just Best Served Cold went too long.
I agree.
Because as Mercado worked her list, and as she worked the list, and she discovered she didn't really have correct information, and the people she was coming in contact that were kind of piecemealing, giving her what was actually going on and their motivations and why they did what they did and how they ended up where they did, the things they were telling her that really felt it was resonating and making sense. And she herself was thinking, maybe I need to rethink this. And that's what I wanted her to do. And she wouldn't do it. And I'm like, and then it kept going.
Well, this is
and I
first
got
law.
a
Of course
little
she can't.
bored. Yeah. but I kept thinking, I expect him to not. And because I expect him to not, he's going to flip it on its head and do it because
Double blind.
right. But I just got a little bored with continuing that list. And I was like,
It had a little bit of a formula.
yeah. And I guess I'd gotten used to none of his other books really having a formula or making fun of formulas, that I was expecting something out of it and I didn't quite get it. And then I got just a little bit bored, but I thought it ended brilliantly.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, that book just dragged a little in the middle. Like strong beginning, really strong end. It's not even like that long of a book. I think it's
And
like
then Shiver's
500
character arc in the middle. What's not so
Yeah.
No, I mean, I like Shiver's character arc. I just think there was like just a few things that were a little dragged out for me.
Yeah.
Whereas in the First Law trilogy, I never felt that way. Like there was no point when I was reading any part of the First Law trilogy where I was like, this is dragging
Same.
out. Like I never felt that way.
I do remember like when it was First Law trilogy was coming to a close, I was like, not yet. Like I'm not ready for this to be over. That's for sure. I do remember that feeling. I don't remember getting that feeling with any of the standalones. Not saying that I thought necessarily that they went too long, but I do,
because they don't have Glock in them.
I keep hoping he's going to show up. I'm like,
but it's
show up.
another one of those things where like you can read the standalones first, but then like you're not going to laugh when someone mentions old sticks, like
Right.
because you're like, okay.
And I don't think if you read them first, I think you miss out on the feeling you get when you see them again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think when you see
Well,
one of
there's
those
that scene
characters
in Best Served Cold where a certain illustrious somebody shows up, and like that whole scene just would be kind of whatever, boring if you hadn't read the First Law trilogy.
Absolutely. I was thinking that
Yeah.
exact scene.
Just two publications.
and then in the Heroes, there's one that shows back up for the first time, and I know now who he truly is, and the others are scared of him, but they don't know who he is. And it's just like, I'm going, this is bad news.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I agree. I'm always a publication order person, though. Even when people are like, you don't need to read pub order, I'm always like, I like to catch every little thing,
Yeah, and on top of that, you get to see an author grow when you take that approach. I mean, hopefully, you get to see them grow. I think with Abercrombie, it's certainly the case. Even though the First Law trilogy has like a lot of charm to it, and some people don't like standalones as much, I still do think I saw an improvement with each installment as far as his writing went, to where we are now with.
But I feel like what we learned watching him write all that is that he's at his best in writing a trilogy. Like a trilogy is like the format that works best for him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He also just happens to write really good book twos, which is not something a lot of other authors.
I was gonna say book twos are usually my favorites.
Yeah, the Heroes actually feels like book 4 to me. There's a mention of Best Served Cold happenings in it, but it's been few so far. Now I'm only halfway through, but it literally feels like it could have been a book 4.
Yeah, I kind of felt that way too. And also, I think the Heroes has the most implications in Age of Madness.
Interesting.
But they all have implications in Age of Madness. You can't skip.
I'm
any.
not skipping any of
Oh,
them.
I know no one here
promise.
is skipping them. For everyone watching, you cannot skip.
Oh, people are watching
any
this?
first love.
Yikes! I would have done my hair.
So, okay, we've been going for almost an hour. I thought it might be fun to end with if you could have commissioned Abercrombie to write any type of thing or anything he hasn't written before, what would you like to see him write?
I want a romance.
Gosh. Can you
I
imagine?
bet that would be
Just a good old bodice ripper.
hysterical. It would definitely be a rom-com. I just can't even imagine.
But like maybe
But
a
it's-
realistic rom-com. Maybe it would be like rom-com if it actually happened in real life.
But would it end happily?
No, absolutely not.
So I think that's a
because
requirement for the genre.
you know it's going to start off as a one-night stand. You know it's going to start off.
Yeah,
It's
you're probably
supposed to. And that's where it was supposed to be.
I could
And
see him
then-
writing an incel character as well.
It's going to be
Oh
so good.
gosh. No thanks.
One that they would somehow like the real challenge would be like
Come
there's
on.
still some distance between us and like these sort of historically fantasy characters. But if the true test of him making us like unlikable characters would be modern day unlikable people. If he could make us like them, that would be the real test.
I think I would want to see a crime drama.
Ooh.
Like I feel like he would write like that very well.
Mhm.
I don't know why.
Like a police one or like
it could be either or. I mean, I will say I think like what was that one movie? It was like End of Watch. Wasn't that the one with Edward Norton in it or somebody? I don't know. Crooked Cops. I could see him writing that very very well.
like The Departed.
Yeah, I'm thinking The Departed. That would probably be the best example. Something along those lines. I've always compared him to Quentin Tarantino. So
Can
anything.
you imagine Quentin Tarantino adapting The First Law?
Yes.
Wow.
In fact, I could. It would be amazing. I wonder how much we'd lose out on since we don't have the internal dialogue. But if there's anyone that could do it, it'd be Tarantino. So.
I'd be really interested in like a standalone from him, tackling the chosen one trope. Like I want him to write like a fully magical, fully like teenage boy or girl chosen one. I would just be interested in what he would do. And I want it to be in his style. So I wouldn't want it to actually be like the typical Wheel of Time chosen one. I would just be really curious how he could subvert like the most classic
Oh man.
of all fantasy tropes. So
I would-
much of our classic fantasy is on that.
I would want that in a first person POV too.
Yes, completely. Like I want it to be a standalone. I want it to be one character POV sort of thing. It'd be very different, but I feel that he'd have it in him to really make that, what's the dark side if you really were the chosen one? What would that mean? And I just think he could bring something really interesting there.
Someone who can't be arsed to do any of the chosen one things.
It could be that, or it could be them doing them and realizing that they're like garbage at everything they're doing. Like, we see so many stories of people like magically so good at everything. Like, what if? Because I always think of myself, I'm like, if I was throwing that, I'd be garbage at all that stuff. Like, you know what I mean? So I feel like he could make it very funny and just interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to see him write a space opera. Like
Come in.
completely different setting, but you still have, you'd still have a lot of characters dealing with tough situations, violent situations, characters out of their comfort zone, clashes of culture, but in a wildly different way than we've seen so far. So I think he'd be good at it, but I think it would challenge him and it would be really fun to read.
I could see that.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird.
There would be so many people getting spaced though.
Oh yeah, I mean,
But probably
terminology
on
is
accident a lot of the time.
I think it's interesting because I watch a decent amount of interviews with him and stuff, and a lot of the stuff he talks about that encourages him is obviously like Game of Thrones. Clearly, he enjoys a lot of the Civil War history, and there's other influences that
makes
he's talked
sense.
about, and I'm blanking on them right now, unfortunately. But
Well, he was influenced by film for the standalones.
yeah, that's true too. Do you know, Leanna, if he's ever mentioned an inspiration from a sci-fi? Like, I don't know if he's a sci-fi guy.
No, I mean, other than the fact that I know he plays video games, and I think some of the video games he's mentioned have been like
Okay.
sci-fi, and I think he said, I mean, he likes Star Wars and things like that, but he predominantly reads history.
Yeah, I would love to know if he like. I'd like to know what his favorite sci-fi is. I think that'd be an interesting question to ask him, just because I haven't heard him talk about it. Of all the hours I've listened to him talk.
Yeah, I think that is interesting because his world is very rooted in like fantasy in a very specific time period, even if his world has magic leaving. And I think all three of our idea, or all four of our ideas, are very like, what would he do with a completely different setting?
Mhm.
I'd just be very curious to see his character work in just like a very different.
Yeah, maybe he'll do like like Dark Academia or whatever.
Oh my god, his Dark Academia. Just kidding. I retract my sci-fi. I want him to write Dark
Yeah, I
Academia.
actually like what's the next thing in fantasy for him
hey,
to do?
puppy.
I'm very curious to see what his new stuff he's working on. I'm curious to see where it's set and what time period, and if he goes a little higher fantasy or not. I haven't
Maybe
read
it's
up
a
much about it.
sci-fi crime thriller with a chosen one and a strong romantic current.
I mean, I'm in. I'm sold.
Well, so to build off that question, if you could have him co-author a book with another author,
oh,
who
this is
springs
easy.
to mind?
I
See,
know
I would
exactly what it
pair
is.
him. I would pair him up with Jim Butcher, because I bet they would write
Ooh.
a crazy, and it would definitely be an urban fantasy.
You know what? I said it was easy, but now I'm kind of like,
I would want to see him co-write something with someone like Brandon Sanderson because it's so wildly
No.
different style.
No
I
way.
do.
well, they're friends. Like they get along really well. So
I'm sure,
that-
and I just feel like if they could like mesh the like epic
Yeah.
magic and epic grand scale of like Sanderson, but with this like really grounded character building that you get from Abercrombie, you could have something really
Well,
nice.
if
I see what you're
Sanderson
saying.
built the world and Abercrombie
I was
wrote
gonna
the
say.
characters,
That's what I was gonna say.
That sounds like a collaboration to me.
I think that
Okay,
could
fine.
work.
You convinced us.
yeah, I think Leanna has the best answer. I was gonna say Robin Hobb, but in a lot of ways,
Oh
There's
no!
the
Everybody would die horribly.
well, you're not wrong.
Do you want to
about
feel
that.
miserable, horrible,
Yeah.
sad
Yeah.
for the rest of your life?
Yes.
Mine's impossible, but the person I actually immediately thought of was Terry Pratchett. I feel like the wit of Abercrombie is just so
This
dead
would be so
on, and
immersive.
Pratchett's wit is so dead on for me. And the way that Pratchett mixed with Gaiman, who is a little bit kind of darker and weirder, I feel like they could come up with something very interesting and funny. Obviously, that's not possible, but that's just who I thought of.
I actually kind of thought
that's
that
a good
too,
one.
and I was gonna say, would I want to see Abercrombie and Gaiman? But I don't think that I would.
What about just Tolkien and just to make him mad? Because you know he'd be like, "What is this trash?
Oh yeah.
Do you even have elves? Your trees don't walk."
Yeah.
Wait,
I mean, it
your
would
wizard-
frustrate. I mean,
your
it would be. I mean, Abercrombie would be equally frustrated.
Oh
Yeah.
man,
Like, this
that would
guy's
be
full-
so
this guy's
bad.
He would be
full
like,
of it.
"People don't talk like this."
This dude's a blowhard. Gandalf the White. Get out of here. What a stupid.
I mean,
name.
like again, like that's one of the things that like Abercrombie does. I mean, that's kind of why this works so well for us. I think is because he asks himself constantly, like, "Is this true? Is this how people talk? Is this
does-
actually?"
Yeah, that's like one of the things. His mother was a writer, and I think it was his interview actually with Daniel Green whenever he talked about it. And he was saying like his mother would always review his works, and he had like this one piece where he said like the diamond, coalesced itself, and it looked like a bazillion raindrops. Blah. And she was like, "Does it really though?" And he's like, "Yeah, you're right. It doesn't. You're actually right. It doesn't." And
Is he? Sorry,
no, good.
I interrupted you. I thought you were done. I feel so bad.
I
was
owe
just saying,
you money.
Is he the one that? Is he the one that says he reads all of his dialogue out loud? Is
Yeah.
he the one I remember saying that?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, there may be others that do that, but he does that.
and
think
you
that
can
helps.
tell because it flows so very well. But I think Leanna, you're right. He's very honest with the reader about his,
I mean, there's a lot of art in his prose, and there's a lot of beauty in what he writes, but it's never so like absurdly flowery that you're like, what even are you trying to say? Like, it's always very grounded.
yeah, I think his
Mhm.
actually really good. And I always go back to Robin Hobb. Like whenever I was reviewing Robin Hobb books, I kept talking about how much Joe Abercrombie reminds me of Robin Hobb in a very different way. But they both are extremely pointed with the way they write, and they have beautiful sentences, but I never feel like it's overbearing. And that's something that ever since I've heard Abercrombie say that, like, the is it though, I've looked at authors as I've read them, and I like high prose. Like I like flowery prose. However, there are times where I'm like, for instance, there's an author I'm reading right now, and they said like it oozed up her spine, and I'm like, does ooze really go up? Ooze
Yeah.
and I know that's really dumb, but that line bothered me like all day today.
That would drive me nuts.
Well, he's so concise with his prose,
He doesn't waste any
and
time.
it's not overly flowery. Like, it's not just full of beautiful sentences. They're just strategically placed so that you recognize it for, like, it stands out when you read one. And you're like, wow,
Yeah,
that's beautiful. I mean, you just immediately stop and you read it again, and you're just like, dang, that just hits some kind of way.
It's just super authentic all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me to gush about Abercrombie. I always have time to
Anytime.
gush about Abercrombie. We just got to get everybody up to speed so that we can all gush about the
Working
newest
on
book
it.
and then cry together that there isn't another one.
We'll have a support group.
And then we can go bang on his door and beg for more.
Yes.
He'd probably just laugh.
You say you have to be realistic.
No, and then he would suck his teeth.
Oh, gross.
Say, why do I do this? Bye.
Bye, guys.
See everyone. Thanks for having me.